Welcome back to Note Lab Mode, where we try to help you, get control of your attention span.
Take it back.
Take it back, yes.
Yeah,
So today,
that's a good one. I like that.
we're going to be doing a deep dive on the book Unstressable by Gawdat.
Ooh, good one.
And think of it as, your mental and emotional training session
Oh, I like that.
to get ready for, life's obstacle course.
That's really interesting you say that because Gawdat himself approaches stress almost like it's a sport. You know, like we can actually train for this. He even calls the book a user's manual for the mind.
Right. And who wouldn't want to, upgrade their mind?
Absolutely.
So before we get into, the training program, let's just set the stage here. One of the things that really stood out to me was how Gawdat doesn't just treat stress as, a feeling, but he actually frames it as a full-blown disease.
Yeah.
Does that seem a little extreme to you?
It might sound a little dramatic at first.
Yeah.
But when you look at the statistics, it's kind of hard to ignore. He cites research showing that 70 to 90% of doctor visits in the U.S.
Wow.
are actually related to stress.
Oh, wow.
You're talking about, everything from heart disease to digestive issues to insomnia, anxiety, the list goes on and on and on. So, while we might not use the word disease in the traditional sense when we think about stress,
Right.
it's clearly having a huge impact on our health.
Yeah, it's like this kind of underlying condition
Yeah,
that's affecting kind of everything else.
it is. It's like the root of all evil, so to speak.
Yeah, and what I also find fascinating is, the fact that our biology hasn't quite caught up to the type of stress that we're facing in the modern world.
Exactly. Yeah. Our brains and bodies are still wired for kind of that, primal fight or flight response. Imagine like a tiger chasing us.
Right.
But today, our stressors tend to be kind of more chronic, insidious, right? It's the work deadlines. It's the social media pressure, the constant barrage of information. It's like our stress response is stuck in this kind of on position. And it's just exhausting.
Right. So how does this constant stress, actually work in our bodies? What's going on behind the scenes?
Okay, well, imagine this, right? You're faced with some kind of perceived threat.
Okay.
It could be anything. Your amygdala, that's the part of the brain that processes emotions, kind of sounds the alarm, right?
Okay.
It signals to your hypothalamus, which then triggers the release of all these hormones like cortisol, which is kind of like your body's built-in turbocharger, right? This preps you to either fight that threat or run away from it.
So it's like our body's kind of revving the engine, getting ready for action.
Exactly.
But if we're constantly facing stressors, that engine's going to burn out.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not sustainable. That's why it's so important to learn how to manage that stress response, right?
Oh, yeah.
And this is where Gawdat's approach is, I think, is really interesting and helpful. He argues that stress is not inevitable.
Okay.
We can train ourselves to become unstressable.
I love that. It's very empowering to think that we have some control over this.
Absolutely.
But how do we actually do that? What does that even look like?
Okay. Well, he introduces this idea of a stress equation.
Yeah.
And it's really simple. Stress equals the load,
Okay.
divided by our ability plus our skills plus our resources.
Okay.
And you can think of it like a seesaw, right?
Okay.
The load represents kind of all the stressors that we're dealing with.
Okay.
And our ability, our skills, our resources represent kind of the counterweight.
Okay.
So the heavier the load gets,
Yeah.
the more we need to build up the other side to stay balanced, right?
Right. So it's like we're, we can lighten the load, so to speak, by increasing our capacity to cope.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about removing stressors, but it's about building kind of our inner strength and resilience.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, training for a marathon. The more we prepare, the more equipped we are to handle those really challenging miles.
Right. Okay. So we need to train for unstressability.
We do.
But before we get into the training program itself,
Yeah.
let's talk about the different types of stress that we're dealing with, because Gawdat outlines 4 main categories, which he calls TONN.
I love this acronym.
I know, it's a good one.
Yes.
Trauma, obsessions, nuisances, and noise.
Yeah.
So starting with trauma, what exactly does he mean by that?
Okay, so trauma refers to kind of those major life events that can really shake us to our core. So, the loss of a loved one, a serious accident, a natural disaster, these are often unavoidable experiences that can leave kind of lasting emotional scars, you know?
Right. And it's important to acknowledge, that trauma is very personal.
Absolutely.
What might be traumatic for one person
Right.
might not be for another.
Totally.
There's no one-size-fits-all definition.
Exactly. And while trauma can be, incredibly painful, Gawdat points out that about 90% of people will actually recover naturally
Wow.
within a few months.
Mhm.
Our brains are amazing. They have this incredible capacity to heal and adapt.
That is reassuring to hear.
Yeah.
It means even in the face of, profound loss or hardship,
Yeah.
there's still hope for healing and growth.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, many people will find that going through a trauma actually leads to some kind of personal growth. Right? It
Yeah.
can change our perspective, maybe deepen our empathy, make us more resilient in the long run.
Yeah. It's like we develop a new appreciation for life
Yeah.
and the things that really matter.
Absolutely. So while trauma is undoubtedly challenging,
Yeah.
it can also be kind of this catalyst for transformation.
All right, so we talked about trauma. What about those kind of more lingering anxieties
Yeah.
that Gawdat calls obsessions? I feel like we all have those, from time to time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, obsessions are those thoughts that just won't quit.
Yeah.
Right? Those anxieties that they might stem from a real event, but then they get amplified and distorted in our minds.
Okay.
It's like we create these mental monsters
Yeah.
that are way scarier than the actual situation.
It's so true. It's like that awkward social encounter that keeps replaying in your head over and over.
Oh, yeah.
Or that worry about a potential future problem
Yeah.
that hasn't even happened yet.
Exactly. And the more we dwell on these thoughts, the more power we give them, right? It's like they take on a life of their own.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Okay, which brings us to the third category, nuisances.
Yes.
What are those exactly?
Okay, think of nuisances as those everyday annoyances
Okay.
that kind of chip away at our peace and our sanity. So traffic jams, noisy neighbors, frustrating technology, those spam emails that never end.
Oh, I know those all too well.
Yeah,
Like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
exactly. Yeah.
Individually, they might seem small, but they can add up to a significant amount of stress over time.
Absolutely, yeah. And if we're not careful, those nuisances can really start to wear us down.
Right. Okay, so we've got the big traumas,
Yeah.
the lingering anxieties, and the everyday annoyances. What's the last category?
Okay, the last one is noise. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Noise refers to that internal chatter that can be our own worst enemy,
Yeah.
right? That constant stream of negative self-talk and criticism and worry and regret
Yeah.
that just plays on repeat in our heads.
Ugh, that inner critic can be brutal.
It is brutal.
It's like having a negative Nancy, living rent-free in your mind.
Exactly, yeah. And the problem is, we often believe what that inner voice is telling us. Right, we take those negative thoughts as truth. And that can really fuel our stress and anxiety.
So we need to learn how to, challenge that inner critic
We do.
and not let it run the show.
Exactly, yeah. And that's where this whole idea of becoming unstressable comes in, right?
Right.
We can learn to become aware of those negative thought patterns and choose to focus on more kind of positive and empowering thoughts.
Right.
Right.
So we've got a pretty clear picture now of these 4 types of stress. Trauma, obsessions, nuisances, and that inner noise. But do you think some people are more prone to certain types of stress than others? Like maybe someone's really good at handling big traumas,
Yeah.
but those everyday nuisances just drive them crazy.
That's a great question, and I think there's definitely some truth to that, right?
Yeah.
We all have our own unique stress triggers and coping mechanisms.
Yep.
Some things just get to us more than others.
Right. And understanding kind of our own personal stress profile can be so helpful
It is.
in figuring out how to best manage those challenges.
Absolutely.
If we know that we tend to get kind of bogged down by nuisances,
Yeah.
we can kind of proactively develop strategies for minimizing their impact.
Absolutely. It's about becoming more self-aware
Mhm.
and tailoring our kind of stress management techniques
Yeah.
to our individual needs.
I love that. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
No,
It's about figuring out what works for you.
it is.
So we've laid the groundwork here. We understand kind of the stress machine, the different types of stress, and the importance of, personalized strategies.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
Okay, well, now it's time to delve into Gawdat's toolkit
Okay?
for actually becoming unstressable. So, the mental, emotional, physical practices that can help us build that resilience and navigate life's challenges with a little more ease and grace, that's where the real training begins.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Welcome back to our deep dive into Unstressable. It's interesting how we often think about stress as something that primarily affects our minds.
Yeah, like all those racing thoughts and worries we were talking about.
Exactly. But what we tend to overlook is how deeply stress impacts our physical well-being, too. It's not just in our heads, it's literally in our bodies.
Oh, tell me about it. I swear I can feel my shoulders like creeping up towards my ears just thinking about my to-do list. And don't even get me started on stress-induced stomach aches.
Ugh, yeah, it's like our bodies are setting up these flares trying to get our attention. And Gawdat really emphasizes that this mind-body connection is a two-way street. So our thoughts and emotions, they trigger physical reactions, and then those physical sensations can then fuel even more stress and negative emotions. It's this vicious cycle.
Okay, so it's not enough to just manage our thoughts. We also need to listen to what our bodies are telling us. But when we're feeling overwhelmed, it's easy to just ignore those signals, right? We push ourselves to the limit. We skip meals, we skimp on sleep, all the things that actually make stress worse.
You're absolutely right. It's like we're running on fumes, and then we wonder why we feel so drained. But Gawdat offers a really practical solution here. He outlines 8 bodily pleas. Signals our bodies send when they need a little TLC. Think of these as your body's non-negotiables.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay those pleas on me.
He calls them move, restore, stretch, relax, breathe, fuel, digest, and snooze.
Okay.
Simple, right? But incredibly powerful when we actually pay attention to them.
Okay, I'm seeing a theme here. A lot of it boils down to slowing down and prioritizing self-care, which can feel like such a luxury when you're stressed out and busy. But I'm starting to see how neglecting those needs actually backfires,
It does.
making us less equipped to handle the stress in the first place.
It's not selfish to prioritize these things. It's essential for our well-being. So let's break down each plea and see how we can kind of incorporate them into our lives, even on those crazy busy days.
Perfect. Let's start with move. We all know exercise is good for us, but sometimes it feels like just another item on that endless to-do list. Does it really make that much of a difference when it comes to stress?
It makes a huge difference. When we move our bodies, we're literally helping to release those pent-up stress hormones like cortisol. It's like we're giving our system a chance to detoxify. And it doesn't have to be some grueling workout, Even a brisk walk, a dance class, or some gentle stretching can shift our energy and mood dramatically.
That's so encouraging to hear. I think a lot of us get intimidated by the idea of exercise, but it's really about finding activities we enjoy and that fit into our lives.
Absolutely. Make it fun, make it sustainable. Next up is restore, which is all about giving our bodies time to rest and recharge. It's like hitting the reset button on our nervous systems.
So what are some good ways to restore?
Hmm.
I'm picturing like a spa day, which sounds amazing, but not always realistic.
It doesn't have to be fancy. It could be taking regular breaks throughout the day to just step away from your work and do some deep breathing. Or maybe it's a warm bath, a massage, spending time in nature, reading a good book, anything that helps you unwind and de-stress.
I love that it's about being intentional about creating space for relaxation and rejuvenation in our lives.
And stretch goes hand in hand with that. Stretching helps to improve flexibility, reduce muscle tension, which often builds up when we're stressed, and it can actually calm the nervous system.
So incorporating some simple stretches into our daily routine can make a big difference.
Absolutely. It's like giving our bodies a chance to release that physical tension so we can feel more relaxed and at ease.
Okay, on to relax. Now, that's something I can definitely get on board with. What are some of Gawdat's suggestions for incorporating more relaxation into our lives?
Well, this is where those practices we often hear about come in. Meditation, mindfulness, yoga, spending time with loved ones, listening to calming music, engaging with hobbies that bring us joy. Anything that helps you shift out of that fight or flight mode and into a more peaceful state.
It sounds like it's about being intentional about creating those pockets of calm throughout our day, not just waiting for the weekend to finally relax.
Exactly. And speaking of things we often take for granted, let's talk about breathe. Seems pretty basic, right? We're doing it all the time.
But it's amazing how often we forget to breathe properly, especially when we're stressed. I know I catch myself taking these shallow, rapid breaths when I'm feeling anxious.
Yeah, that's a classic stress response. But when we do that, we're actually perpetuating the cycle. By bringing conscious awareness to our breath and practicing those deep, slow belly breaths, we can actually interrupt the stress response and calm our nervous systems down.
It's like we have this built-in relaxation tool right under our noses and we're not even using it.
It's true. Learning to breathe properly is one of the most powerful things we can do for our stress levels. Okay, moving on to fuel. This one's all about nourishing our bodies with the right foods.
I have a feeling you're not going to tell me to eat more donuts.
Probably not. But you'd be surprised how many people try to cope with stress by reaching for sugary treats or comfort foods.
Oh, I'm definitely guilty of that. It's like my brain wants a quick fix, but it always ends up making me feel worse in the long run.
It's understandable, but Gawdat emphasizes that what we eat has a profound impact on our mood, our energy levels, our ability to handle stress. A diet rich in whole foods, fruits, vegetables, lean protein, it's not rocket science, but it makes a world of difference.
It's like fueling our bodies with premium gas instead of the cheap stuff. We're going to run more smoothly and efficiently.
Love that analogy. And speaking of efficiency, let's talk about digest. Now, this one might not sound as glamorous as some of the others, but it's crucial.
Okay, break it down for me.
When we're stressed, our digestive system can really take a hit. We might experience indigestion, bloating, constipation, all sorts of unpleasantness. So digest is about paying attention to our gut health, eating mindfully, chewing our food thoroughly, and making sure we're getting enough fiber and fluids to keep things moving smoothly.
That makes sense. It's like we need to create the right environment for our bodies to process food and absorb nutrients properly.
Exactly. And when our gut is happy, our whole body tends to feel better.
And last but not least, the bodily plea we often sacrifice the most. Snooze. I know I'm a total grump when I don't get enough sleep.
You and everyone else. Sleep deprivation is a recipe for stress. When we're sleep deprived, our stress hormones go into overdrive, our cognitive function takes a nosedive, and it becomes even harder to cope with the challenges of daily life.
But here's the thing. When you're stressed, it can be even harder to fall asleep. It's like your mind just won't shut off.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important to create a relaxing bedtime routine. Put away the electronics, dim the lights, maybe do some gentle stretching or read a book to calm your mind down.
It's like signaling to your body that it's time to wind down and prepare for rest.
Exactly. And even if you can't always get the recommended 8 hours, just small improvements in your sleep hygiene can make a big difference.
So we've covered the 8 bodily please move, restore, stretch, relax, breathe, fuel, digest, and snooze. It's a pretty holistic approach to stress management.
It is, and the beauty of it is that we can start incorporating these practices into our lives one at a time. It's not about being perfect, it's about making small, sustainable changes that add up over time.
And as we start to feel the benefits, it becomes easier to make those choices a priority. It's like we're creating a positive feedback loop. Taking care of our bodies helps us manage stress more effectively, which in turn makes it easier to keep up those healthy habits.
Exactly. And as we're addressing these physical needs, we're also creating a foundation for managing our mental and emotional stress as well. It's all interconnected.
That makes so much sense. It's like we're strengthening our resilience on all levels, mind, body, and spirit. Speaking of spirit, I'm curious to hear about the last piece of the puzzle. Spiritual stress. This one seems a bit more nuanced than the others.
It is, and it's often overlooked because it's not as tangible as, say, a pounding headache or racing thoughts. But it can be just as debilitating.
So what exactly is spiritual stress?
It's that feeling of disconnection from our true selves,
Yeah.
our purpose, our values, that sense of emptiness or lack of meaning that can leave us feeling lost and adrift.
I think a lot of people in our fast-paced, achievement-oriented culture can relate to that. We're constantly striving for the next goal, the next accomplishment, but we rarely stop to ask ourselves, is this actually making me happy? Is this aligned with what I truly value?
You're hitting the nail on the head. And Gawdat argues that this disconnect is a major source of stress in our lives. He believes that the soul's natural state is calm and happy, but when we're out of alignment with our true selves, that inner peace gets disrupted.
So it's not just about managing external stressors, it's also about cultivating that inner harmony and sense of purpose.
Exactly. And how do we do that? Well, Gawdat suggests practices like meditation, spending time in nature, connecting with our values, engaging in acts of service, anything that helps us tap into that deeper sense of meaning and connection.
It sounds like it's about finding those things that light us up from the inside out, that remind us of who we truly are and what we're here to do.
That's beautifully put. And as we nurture that spiritual connection, we may find that we're better equipped to handle the inevitable stresses of life with more grace and resilience.
I love that idea that by tending to our spiritual well-being, we're actually building our capacity to navigate challenges with more peace and strength. It's like we're strengthening
Mhm.
our inner foundation so that we're less easily shaken by the storms of life.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final piece of Gawdat's framework, his 6 pillars of an unstressable life. These are the core principles that he believes can help us put all of this together and live with more intention, purpose, and joy.
Okay, I'm ready to hear about these pillars. It sounds like they're going to bring together everything we've talked about so far.
They do. And they offer a roadmap for not just managing stress, but for actually thriving in the face of it.
All right, I'm all ears. What are these 6 pillars of an unstressable life that Goddard talks about?
Well, think of these pillars as kind of the foundation for building a life that's, not just stress-free, but actually fulfilling and joyful. And the first pillar is all about understanding the truth.
Okay, so what does that mean in practice? Are we talking about like some grand universal truth?
Not exactly. It's more about becoming kind of discerning thinkers, like detectives of our own minds.
Hmm.
Right. Unstressable people, they question their assumptions, they challenge those negative thoughts that we talked about earlier,
Right.
and they look for evidence to support or refute their beliefs.
So it's about recognizing that our thoughts aren't always facts.
Exactly.
We can get so caught up in our own heads, believing everything our inner critic tells us.
Right.
And that just amplifies stress.
Yeah, it does. Remember those 3 anchors of sanity that Gawdat talks about?
Yeah.
Asking ourselves, is it true? Can I fix it? Can I accept it and make life better despite it?
Yeah.
Those are powerful tools for kind of filtering those stressful thoughts.
It's like we're taking back control of our minds
Yeah,
instead of letting those thoughts like run wild.
exactly. And that leads us to the second pillar, which is taking action. Unstressable people, they're proactive problem solvers,
Hmm.
They don't just sit around worrying, they get things done.
I love that. It's about moving from like a passive victim mindset
Right.
to an empowered, I've got this attitude.
Exactly. Yeah. If there's something they can do to improve the situation, they do it. And if it's something that's outside of their control, then they focus on, adapting, finding workarounds.
It reminds me of that serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Oh, I love that. That's perfect, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the third pillar is all about mastering your emotions.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where things get, I think, really interesting.
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit earlier when we talked about, the 90-second rule and becoming the observer of our emotions.
Right, exactly. Unstressable people, they understand that emotions are signals. They're not weaknesses.
Right.
Right. They learn to kind of recognize and process those emotions in healthy ways without, getting swept away by them.
It's like we're building emotional intelligence,
We are. Yeah.
becoming more aware of what we're feeling and why, and then choosing how to respond.
Exactly. And the fourth pillar is something that, we discussed quite a bit earlier, prioritizing a healthy lifestyle. This is where those 8 bodily pleas come in.
Right. Move, restore, stretch, relax, breathe, fuel, digest, snooze.
It's about taking care of our physical selves.
Yeah.
So we have the energy and the resilience to handle stress.
It makes me think of that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Oh, that's so good.
We can't expect to manage stress effectively if we're running on fumes.
So true. Now, pillar number 5 is setting boundaries.
Okay.
This one can be tough for a lot of people, especially in our kind of always-on culture.
Right. Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in the pressure to do it all, be everything to everyone.
Right.
But that's a recipe for burnout.
It is. It is. Unstressable people, they recognize that they can't do everything. And saying no is essential for protecting their time, their energy, their well-being.
It's about creating like healthy boundaries in our relationships, our work lives,
Yeah,
even with technology.
absolutely. It's about being intentional with our time and energy and making choices that align with our values and our priorities.
Right. And finally, we have the 6th pillar, nurturing your spiritual connection. This is the one that really resonated with me.
Yeah, it's often overlooked,
Yeah.
but it's so crucial for kind of finding that deep sense of peace and meaning that can help us, weather any storm.
Yeah, we talk about how spiritual stress can show up as that feeling of emptiness, that lack of purpose.
Exactly. Yeah, unstressable people, they recognize that there's something greater than themselves, whether that's a connection to nature, a faith community, a sense of universal love, or, something else entirely.
Right.
And they make time for practices that nourish that connection. So meditation, spending time in nature, acts of service, creative pursuits.
It's about cultivating a sense of wonder,
Yeah.
awe, gratitude, those things that connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah. And those feelings can be incredibly grounding and calming, especially when we're facing challenges in our lives.
This has been such an insightful exploration of Mo Gawdat's book, Unstressable.
It really has.
It's clear that becoming unstressable isn't about eliminating stress altogether.
Right.
It's about changing our relationship to it.
It's about developing those mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual tools that allow us to navigate life's, ups and downs
Yeah.
with more grace, resilience, and even joy.
I love that. It's not about becoming immune to stress, but it's about becoming unbreakable.
Exactly. And as we've discussed, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
There's always more to learn and explore.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling incredibly inspired to start putting these principles into practice.
Me too. And remember, those 6 pillars, they're a roadmap. They're not like this rigid set of rules.
Mm.
Experiment, find what works for you, and be kind to yourself along the way.
That's such great advice. And for our listeners out there, if you're ready to take your stress management game to the next level, I highly recommend checking out Mel Gawdat's book, Unstressable.
It's such a practical, insightful, and surprisingly humorous guide to kind of navigating the modern world with more ease and peace.
And remember, becoming unstressable is a team sport. Share this episode with a friend, a family member, a coworker, anyone who could use a little more calm and resilience in their lives.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring.